my special thanks to the University System of Georgia Office of Faculty Development. And I'm especially glad that so many people were able to join me today. I definitely look forward to the time after the presentation when we can exchange ideas. And I think this is an amazing opportunity indeed to be able to talk about teaching and related activities. I currently teach at Georgia Gwinnett College, and this presentation is primarily a reflection on my activities and my experiences teaching students whose experiences may be very different from my own, having grown up in Lithuania during the Cold War. And the main goal of this presentation would be to demonstrate how the concept of intersectionality, meaning interaction of multiple identities, can be integrated in specific activities and also help to promote a global awareness, global consciousness. So you may know already that intersectionality has been described as one of the most important contributions of feminist scholars. And during the last 2 decades, it has led to the creation of a large body of literature, very interesting literature in various disciplines. And it also has become a very fashionable political term that, again, most politically savvy students are familiar with. And furthermore, during the past several years, this concept has become also a center of some political controversies that I will briefly touch upon, but I primarily would like to focus on the use of intersectional pedagogy. So therefore, I believe that it's essential for all of us to know what this term means, where it came from, and whether indeed it can be a useful tool in teaching. I will start out with describing the term itself, then move on to a description of intersectional pedagogies, and then talk about 3 specific class activities. So let us start out with concept, with the origin of the concept and the definition of the concept. I'd like to mention here Kimberly Crenshaw, who radically transformed feminism, and she is commonly considered to be the mother of intersectionality. She argued that it was necessary to look into multiple systems of oppression and the intersections of various identities, such as race, gender, and class. She drew on specific socioeconomic situation of Black women whose concerns and experiences were very different from white women in the United States. Thus, I believe a very promising research agenda together with a political agenda was established, and this particular agenda attempted to capture the diversity of women's experiences worldwide. Kathy Davis, whom I quote in this particular slide, as you can see, argued that because this concept was open-ended and ambiguous, it actually became rather successful in academia and beyond, and it became the so-called cutting-edge concept, both in theory and politics. And intersectionality obviously appeals not just to scholars, but also to general public, both college professors and students. I would also like to mention here that the term is used not just by academics, but also by various international organizations, such as the UN, the European Union, and rigid, even quantitative approaches to measure economic development also draw on intersectionality when developing various measures of inequality and assessments of human rights. Various non-governmental organizations also use this term widely to pursue their political goals. I'll just give one example that many people may be familiar with already, that some movements in the United States use the slogan, Ferguson to Palestine, to exploit this concept politically to suggest that injustices can intersect even in very different political and cultural contexts. Indeed, this is a controversial proposition. It can elicit emotional confrontations. In this presentation, I would like to argue, however, that as a theoretical concept, intersectionality can be used successfully in thinking about how to teach in diverse environments, or in other words, to come up with an intersectional pedagogy. So here you can see some tenets of an intersectional pedagogy. What would it entail? Admittedly, my discipline, political science, was a latecomer to incorporating the concept of intersectionality into theories and especially into teaching. Amy Cabrera Rasmussen, whom I quote on the slide, has articulated the main tenets of an intersectional pedagogy in political science. She argues that this concept is essential for the discipline of political science to adapt to new demographic and social realities in the United States. Developing an intersectional pedagogy would include learning to appreciate multiple identities, understanding various processes related to power, transforming what we teach through the inclusion of diverse experiences, and committing to equality. So these are four principles of intersectional pedagogy that Rasmussen has identified. Myself, I focus on the first one, which would be appreciation of multiple identities in various class activities. Why use such pedagogies? I believe that intersectional pedagogy definitely has value, especially as we, both students and educators, are struggling to conceptualize complex phenomena, both in domestic and international politics. These phenomena include what I would like to talk about in my presentation: globalization, migration. And I believe that, especially when talking about issues such as migration, it is crucial to avoid simplistic identity politics, dividing individuals into us and them, challenge our students to appreciate complexity, and also develop a sense of interdependence between professors and their students. So having talked about some theoretical aspects of intersectionality, I would like to go into the second part of my presentation, which would be talking about what happens in the classroom, about specific activities. And I would like to start out with the first activity, which focuses on the intersection of race and global capitalism. Those of us who teach classes such as Introduction to American Government touch upon sensitive topics quite often, and those sensitive topics include race, gender, especially when we discuss civil rights. The following activity, I believe, helps to internationalize the curriculum by analyzing intersections between whiteness and global capitalism. So what do? I have used documentary produced by the Scottish Documentary Institute entitled The Unbearable Whiteness of Being. To me, as someone from Eastern Europe, I immediately think about the unbearable lightness of being, and definitely that helps me to relate very much to the story in this documentary. This video is available for free online. It's only 10 minutes, and it's an excellent introduction into Asian skin lightening and related industries. Interestingly, I learned about this documentary from a human rights activist in Vilnius, Lithuania, who was also a very emotional and follower of the theory of intersectionality. So this video is a story about an ambitious small company that tries to develop a product to lighten skin and, in their own words, help people be more successful. A good result is when people get whiter skin, and obviously success in the global economy comes with it. The documentary is full of powerful images and stories told by individuals who want to make it in the global economy, no matter what it takes, even if it means whitening skin. And I believe that it's an excellent start to make the first step in applying intersectional pedagogy, which is to explore the ways in which whiteness and the meanings associated with it are perpetuated in different contexts. Various questions can be asked after showing this video, including moral issues associated with running a company like this, philosophical questions that everyone has to face, such as what are the best ways to fight discriminatory and unfair practices? How much unfairness we as individuals are willing to tolerate to preserve our own well-being? What would it take to deconstruct an unfair system based on whiteness as the right color of skin in the global capitalist economy? And here you can see a slide which actually is a screenshot capturing what I think is a powerful image from the documentary, where we can see indeed the intersection between whiteness and capitalism. A woman is showing the product, and she clearly has a whiter skin. And the other image from the film would be a face of a woman, also clearly being used to sell whiteness and success in global capitalist economy. In one of my upper level specialized classes, I used this film to introduce various theories related to identity politics, and later I asked my students some open-ended questions asking for their reactions to this documentary. So what you see here would be sample student responses. I think that the students actually started to think about issues such as equality, the construction of unequal systems and their relationships to race, as well as mechanisms whereby racial inequalities are perpetuated. This is consistent with the two principles of intersectional pedagogy outlined earlier during this presentation, namely that a fuller understanding of the processes related to acquiring and exercising power, and also creating a normative commitment to equality, indeed help in teaching political science classes. These two tenets or principles, specifically the acquisition of power by disempowered groups and the commitment to equality, as well as learning to appreciate multiple identities, are embedded in the second activity that I would also like to discuss with you next. The second activity is about immigration and civil rights. And it has two main goals. As you can see, deconstruct the category of others associated with immigrants and develop a more nuanced understanding of civil rights. Before developing this activity, I honestly used to dread talking about issues such as immigration in my classes. Also, an immigrant myself, I did not know what would be the best way to counter polarized discussions in the classroom in which immigrants were often treated as dangerous others. In the past, for example, one popular textbook that I used in my Political Science 1101 classes used a thesis by Samuel Huntington, a famous political scientist, who argued that immigrants, especially the Hispanics, were a threat, quote unquote, to true, quote unquote, American values. Getting familiarized with intersectional pedagogy helped me to conceptualize a strategy focusing on individual life stories and storytelling to address similar issues. During the section of the course when we discussed civil rights, I introduced my students to the story of Sylvia Mendez, whose immigrant family, her father was from Mexico, her mother was from Puerto Rico, fought for her right to be educated in a white school in California when schools there were still segregated in the 40s. Sylvia's story is fascinating. Her family moved into a ranch previously inhabited by Japanese Americans who were treated as potential traitors during World War II and placed in detention camps. Mendes' family, they were very successful in agriculture, and they were able to achieve their dream to let Sylvia attend a good school that she wanted to get into through a legal process by winning the right for their daughter to get a better education. This case became an inspiration for Brown versus Board of Education, which most of our students are already familiar with. Telling the story of Sylvia Mendes, I believe, can empower both students and professors to think about various ways to empowerment and equal treatment. And I do believe that, especially again, focusing on storytelling, especially when covering court cases, also can help to reduce polarization in classroom. So I use various activities to incorporate individual stories in the teaching of U.S. government, including one-minute papers, group projects, asking the students to tell Sylvia's story, and brief essays. These are some of the ways of demonstrating how inequalities and oppressions are experienced by real people, and also identifying which strategies can be used to overcome those inequalities. Not many students are familiar at first with Sylvia Mendes' story. That's why they find it interesting. Although I have not yet devised a way to quantitatively measure their responses, they often express surprise that indeed there was this precedent to Brown versus Board of Education. So here you can see Sylvia Mendes herself and also a source, I think a very useful source, NPR's Code Switch that can be used to introduce Sylvia's story. StoryCorps is another excellent source for stories, including people who came to the United States from other countries. So let me conclude with the third activity, and it's a discussion of multidirectional memory, a concept developed by Michael Rothberg, which I do believe can be a very promising way forward to develop intersectional pedagogies in political science and related disciplines. So Michael Rothberg argued that even very different experiences, such as the Holocaust and also oppression experienced by African Americans, do not need to be in competition with each other. He actually argued that various traumas can be source of empathy, not competition. And it seems to me that the previous exploration of Sylvia Mendes' story can definitely be framed as a potential for creating common experiences between various groups. In his work, Rothberg engaged a text by W.E.B. Du Bois, The Negro and the Warsaw Ghetto, and this can be an excellent supplementary reading in various classes, including American government. In this text, Du Bois describes his experience traveling to Europe, including Warsaw, during World War II, and seeing the oppression experienced by European Jews. And including his text into political science can help me to also introduce my own region, where I'm originally from, but I believe also can help to internationalize the study of civil rights and reveal connections between the Holocaust that most students are familiar with and also other traumas. And again, various techniques can be used to achieve these goals, including directed reading, small group discussions, group presentations. The text is relatively short. However, it's a great start to introduce the concepts of shared vulnerability and also human rights, thus transcending national borders when teaching political science. In the end, it seems to me that this may be the greatest promise of intersectional pedagogy, especially in political science, where categories such as national government, national interest, and the like are still used without much hesitation, without often explaining who we are. So I hope that the sources and also references to the works mentioned in this presentation may be of some use to you, and I definitely thank you for your attention and look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much. That was great. I'm wondering, so if you have a question, you may either put it in the chat or you may raise your hand. There should be a little hand icon, and you can click on that, and we will unmute your microphone if you have a question. So while we're waiting for those, oh, there's Ian. Okay. Ian, go ahead. Ian, do you want to try again? We're not hearing you. No, we cannot. How about you go ahead and put your question in the chat? I'm not sure what's going on with the microphone. Okay. And let's see. We have a couple people who have said very interesting, and thank you so much. Okay, Ian is asking, where does class fit into this? Do you mean like socioeconomic, or do you mean how do you fit? Okay,
I can go ahead and try to answer this. I think, obviously, in addition to gender, in addition to ethnicity, social class is a very important a dimension of identity. And obviously, there's a huge literature in political science, but also other disciplines. And I know Ian Petty's own work explores how, again, class could definitely be one of the major factors affecting education, affecting social status. So for the literature of intersectionality, obviously class is very much one of the major identity dimensions. If you think about the first activity that I talked about, related to global capitalism, I think, especially in structured discussions in class, I think it would be very, very useful to include this dimension and talk about, how people are trying to get out from a certain social category to the next, and what are they willing to do with their identity, how they're willing to reshape it, again, to get out of one particular social class that they are in. So again, intersectionality would be looking into various intersecting identity dimensions, and social class would definitely be one of them.
Are you experiencing resistance to this approach in your classroom?
I try, as you can see, this is not the only approach that I'm using. And students definitely responded. I used the first activity many times in class, and students definitely responded very well to, again, talking about a group that many of them may not be familiar with, that is to say, the experiences of Asians in the UK, right? So it's not that we're talking about a group which is, how shall I put it, very much in Georgia, right here, right now, right? So it's almost like starting to talk about a group which is outside of Georgia, USA, helps me to also relate to the problems that we see in Georgia and other parts of the United States. So far, I have to say that my experience has been quite positive, surprisingly so in class, because again, I used to dread talking about race, talking about immigration, talking about discrimination, and I think introducing and thinking about activities that are designed to focus on the complexity of human individuals helps me to, again, fight with this resistance.
Thank you.
Very well. You're very welcome.
We've got some questions in the chat, and we have Natalia has her hand up. So Natalia, I'm going to unmute you first, and then we'll go to some of the questions in the chat. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Hello?
Okay. Yes, I want to thank Dovile very much for this presentation. This is very, very helpful indeed. And I wanted to say a couple of words about the program which I am doing and kind of ask for your opinion, what intersects with what. We are actually having students from here, University of St. Mary, communicate with students from Russia. We are watching something similar, watching a video on the internet, and then professors there and here develop questions and see the reactions of different classrooms. We call it international classroom. I was wondering, obviously, in this situation, we are not talking about intersection of race or intersection of gender and race or something like that. But nevertheless, it is a clearly intersectionality, in my opinion, because the students in these two different classrooms located in the opposite sides of the world have different reactions to the same documentaries. For example, we watched ISIS in Afghanistan, something unrelated basically to our countries, and the reactions were quite different. Do you consider this to be intersectionality? And if it is still intersectionality, this is clearly political question. This is clearly political intersection. How would you interpret that situation, Dovile?
That's definitely a question coming from a political philosopher. Thank you, Natalia, very much. I'm familiar with your work on global classroom, and I think it's a fascinating project that you and your students and also your university are engaged in. And let me just also address, since I'm familiar with your project, let me address some of the parts of your project that I believe would fit very nicely into what I call following the work of Rasmussen, intersectional pedagogy, right? So I think that if we're looking at the goals of intersectional pedagogy, I think that, one of the major goals would be challenge the students to appreciate complexity in global affairs, right? So what your classroom activity does, where you have students from Russia interact with students from the United States, I think it definitely helps both sides, right, to shift their perspectives, to shift their frames of reference, specifically to say, look, we're looking at the same phenomenon almost, right? I mean, developments in Afghanistan, yet we are seeing very different results, right? The students are actually having different reactions to the policies. And then I think intersectional pedagogy, right, would inspire to ask the questions, why is this the case, right? Why are we seeing such different reactions? Does our schooling have to do something with it? Does government propaganda have something to do with it? Does our family have something to do with it? So I think this way we can actually reach, especially when the students reflect on why we see such different reactions. Again, we are able to avoid simplistic identity policies and see how our own identities indeed include intersecting dimensions. So I do believe that, again, if we're looking at what we are trying to get with moving towards intersectional pedagogy, then again, I think classroom activities like that definitely challenge the students to appreciate complexity and also avoid simplistic identity politics, saying we and our country are always right, something along these lines.
Great, thank you. I have two questions here that I'm going to combine, and hopefully the questioners won't mind. So Jelena says, to what extent do we already do this without systematically calling it intersectionality? Are there any obstacles to this approach? And then Jennifer asks, is there a way to measure the effectiveness or outcomes? So like measuring growth and empathy or understanding of otherness.
I think both of them are very, very good questions. And for Yelena Subotic, I mean, I think she gets into the heart of the problem, which is to say that obviously this intersectional pedagogy is still very much a project, especially in political science, in development. Whether or not we as teachers are already doing a lot of the things in the classroom, such as, again, trying to help the students to switch perspectives, helping the students to acquire global consciousness, etc. I think that's probably we are are indeed doing a lot of this already. But I think one thing that intersectional pedagogy helps for me to do would be to, again, whenever I approach a policy, whenever I approach a topic, whenever I approach a theme, I definitely try to keep in mind how important it is for my students to be able to learn about another perspective. And also be able to switch perspectives. So in a sense, it's I think probably one of the greatest contributions of intersectional pedagogy, which again, which still very much would be in the making, would be to constantly have this goal and constantly think about, how do we communicate to the students the complexity of categories that we're using in political science. Obviously, I think that there are obstacles to this approach. It's again, it's in a sense both a strength and also weakness of intersectionality, that it's open-ended, that indeed it's the term, as I was mentioning in the beginning of my presentation, it's used both by politicians and practitioners. And I think that very often, especially recently, since many actually non-governmental organizations started using this term to pursue their political agendas, again, if we start referring to intersectional pedagogy as only one particular intersectional pedagogy, sometimes there could be resistance linking the term intersectionality to politics. Right. So I think that's a difficult challenge that we need to be aware of. And regarding a very interesting question by Jennifer about measurement of outcomes, this is definitely for me something that I need to think about. But I think the suggestion of trying to come up with perhaps even a quantitative measurement to see whether the students have developed, let's say, ability to emphasize with others or ability to, again, know other cultures better. I think there are quantitative work in educational philosophy and also educational science doing this, and I think there's no reason why we should not be able to develop such quantitative approaches to measurement of learning. Again, from what I gather in political science, this is not very widely, shall I say, used, not very widely known as intersectional pedagogy. It's still very much a project in development. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done here. All right.
We have one more very complex question, and I'm not certain that we're going to be able to have time to answer. But Doug Becker asks, says thank you, and has two interrelated thoughts. And the first is a question. How much do you present to students the concept of identity broadly as a methodological tool? In essence, are the students directed to consider exactly what we mean by identity, or are they invited to consider race more innately or intuitively? This can lead to a more broad question about the elasticity of identity, and in particular relation to gender identities that is much more pervasive among our students today. Increasingly, students will resist gender identities ranging from gender neutral to gender fluid, or even gender apathy. So how flexible is identity even within the classroom? Do you have a two-second answer for that?
Before you answer that, I also had a private chat from Sabine who said that she also thinks there's an identity bias where we favor one identity or two, like gender or race, versus others. And how do we avoid this bias? How can we balance achieving true intersectionality in our classrooms? I think they're kind of related there.
They are indeed, and I wish I had responses, full responses to these wonderful questions. I definitely would need to actually think more about these important ideas, especially about resistance to certain uses of identity, right? And indeed, especially when it comes to, I think, gender or race identity. Indeed, I think it's time to move beyond simplistic definitions of these identities. And how to achieve true intersectionality. Again, this is probably incredibly difficult to do. But I would like to just conclude with a brief observation or a suggestion. Again, the way I understand intersectional pedagogy, it's not that we necessarily, march into class and say, hey, we're going to talk about gender, race, class, nationality now, all of these different identities. I think that would be a prescription for disaster. But what I try to show in my activities is that it's possible to talk about phenomena. It's possible to talk about policies, such as immigration policies, such as civil rights policies, but again, keeping the importance of showing multiple identities in mind. And that's, I think, that's the idea behind the intersectional approach. That civil rights, for example, it's not just about the issues between blacks and whites in Georgia, right? That there were important contributions from other groups, such as immigrants. So it's not, again, I think that's probably the first step to think about these complicated questions would be that it's a lens to study policies, to study phenomena, and thus indeed help to understand that, again, categories are constructed and that indeed these issues can be definitely looked at differently by various groups. I know that this is not a complete response, and I think these are great questions that will be helpful for me to think about as I try to write a chapter for a book on it. So.
Great. Thank you so much, and thanks for so many great questions. This is obviously a topic that folks want to think and talk about. So, Mark, this is usually when you tell us what's happening next, but I believe this is the last one we have scheduled.
It is, and I just wanted to thank everyone for being here with us all year. Please, you'll get an evaluation that will be a pop-up that you'll get after this.